Oh man, I did get like one of the more popular tweets I've had in a while where I posted a picture of my desk and I had all the cups because when I get
Nice.
busy, I just collect cups.
Yeah.
So
It's, what
there
do I
was
have?
somebody posted and was like, okay, let me count how many. There you go.
Yep. That they just like
Just
happen.
yes, it
My
does.
wife
It's
gets
true.
so mad. She's like, "Can you just stick with one cup?" Like,
Oh man,
yeah, and then
I
the aha.
pour right now. Yes, love it.
I'm usually pretty good about clearing mine.
I'm so
Somebody was
bad.
like, usually I do it in the morning, like it accumulates during the
Clear it
day,
out,
and then
yeah.
But
Reset
anyways,
in the
we're
morning.
trying to guess like how many cups of coffee. have you been
How much coffee do you drink in a day?
through? Usually only one. I think about 1 cup.
Oh wow.
But the
Nice.
question is, how big is that cup?
That's like one of my friends
If it's a
drinks
venti,
massive cups.
There you
Yeah.
go.
if it's a venti, this is 20 ounces, so about 20 ounces a day.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So yeah, I've been drinking 1 cup of coffee a day, which is 8 ounces.
But you do caffeine, right? So mine's all decaf.
Even more impressive.
Yours is all decaf?
All
Have we talked
decaf.
about this? So you don't
Yeah.
drink caffeine at
No,
all?
I try not to.
Huh. So you just like the
Yeah.
taste? Or did you used
Yes.
to like
I
coffee with
used to.
caffeine and
I did. So
Huh.
this is not not advised, but I was like drinking so much coffee and caffeine and stuff. I was having heart palpitations.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that's what it was until I got pregnant and then did decaf caffeine free, like cold
and then it
turkey.
went away
I've
magically.
never had an issue. And so I just have never gone back.
That's funny.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
Ryan
do
Rogan in the chat
3.
says he drinks 2,100 milligrams of caffeine per day, which I
did-
think like an average cup of coffee is like 90.
Yeah. So
Ryan, this
oh
may,
man.
He is right. There is caffeine in decaf.
but not
So I'm
lots
not-
though. Like I think Jess actually told me the other day. So in her decaf coffee, it was maybe 30 milligrams. of
30 is what I was
caffeine.
gonna say.
Okay.
I have no idea.
Which I guess lots is relative because if you think there's 0, but there's actually 30
Right.
and you're drinking 16 cups a day, then you're still drinking a pretty good amount of caffeine.
Right.
But
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, I have 3. The other day I did that what is it? Panera drink with all the like it's on TikTok going viral right now because of all the caffeine. Like one drink has I think it's 2,300 milligrams in it.
Oh my goodness.
And like tore me up. Fidgety, restless. I drank it at like 11 o'clock in the morning. I
Wow.
stayed up until 4 a.m. Like
Were you productive or are you just like anxious?
I was anxious the whole day. It was
that's
like
awful.
yeah, I was like, I can't get it out. I'm like tweaking it and like trying to get work done.
Oh my
Ryan said 2 milligrams of caffeine compared to 40 in a proper cup of coffee. So that's less than, maybe that was what, I don't know. Anyway, whatever the number is, definitely lower, but also still something.
So, Michael, did you crash hard after that?
Well, it messed up my whole next day. So like I crashed. So I tried to like get my workday started at the normal time, which is like 8 o'clock.
Okay.
So from 4 to 8, I slept, but like restless all night. And then I took an afternoon nap, which like is great because I got rest, but then it's bad because I'm still trying to make up and get back on schedule. This is rough. Don't recommend.
10 out of 10.
North America.
0 out of 10 would not recommend.
Yeah.
I'm not ready for that level of caffeine. I've gotten.
Neither was I. It was.
Well, yeah. Obviously. I had I made some espresso earlier because Jess got me some new nice espresso beans from Beanbox for Christmas that I got to open early. And I made espresso.
She
while
does
she's
that
gone.
often, doesn't she?
I've opened like 6 gifts so far. And my dogs ripped open one of them, which is a really fancy chocolate flavored tea. It was delicious. But my dog smelled chocolate and then opened the thing to find that it was tea and then left it alone. But anyway, so I made espresso and she came home from like running errands and stuff. And I was very hyper. And she was not so much into it.
Like, hey babe, how are you? How was your day?
Yeah. Much more dramatic than that, but we'll leave it at that. What's up, Scion? Will, Ryan hanging out.
Hey,
I imagine people are getting ready for the holiday. This is actually the last formal thing that I'm doing before the holidays.
I'm honored.
I'll do stuff off and on. We're going to Florida Friday, or maybe we may leave Thursday because there's going to be like
Oh.
weather here, probably for you too, Amy, of like maybe snow.
Usually I get
maybe
it like
ice.
a day later. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, that's right.
Where are you at?
I'm in Memphis. She's in Nashville, so a couple
Yeah.
hours
Oh,
east of
okay.
here.
Yeah. But I usually get it like half a day,
The
a
next
day
day, yeah.
later.
Mm.
Yeah.
What's up,
I
Richard?
did see that. So my sister lives in Cincinnati and she was looking at the weather because they're supposed to come down on Christmas Day. And so
It's rough this time of year.
Yeah. Cincinnati, 5 or 6 hours away. Maybe.
No.
From
Americans
I
in
guess
geography.
it's closer. I guess it's closer for. I think it's pretty close for you, Amy. Is it 3 or 4 hours away? I was thinking from here.
I'm sorry. I got distracted by
know you
Ryan's comment about
Red
I had
Bull.
Red Bull. I never had Red Bull if you had a Red Bull.
I like Red Bull.
What was the question?
Just how far Cincinnati is from Nashville?
5 hours.
Oh, it is? Okay. So still
Yeah.
a little bit farther.
That's why I was just like smiling and not answering.
You were like,
what-
yes, exactly.
What was the question? I've never had a Red Bull. I made it through college without any Red Bull.
Wow.
Mhm.
I've never had like my own Red Bull. I've had like a sip just to taste it, and I've had vodka
Commandeer.
Red Bull a couple times as a drink.
Those are crazy because like you're drunk but you can't pass out. It's like,
Oh.
it's like what do I do?
Just
Mm.
enjoy it.
Just
for all
enjoy
you
it,
can.
just coast. Ride that wave.
All right, are y'all ready to get started?
Let's do it.
Anybody
Let's go.
have hard stops, by the way,
No,
to be conscious of?
Whenever little man decides
Yeah,
I have a
that's
hard
true.
stop,
It'll be over.
Exactly.
he's like, I'll shut this whole thing
It will
down.
be it'll be hard for all of us. So
Right.
it better just stop.
Cool. We can roll with that. All right. Welcome everyone to another episode of Compressed FM, a podcast all about web development and design with a little bit of zest. In today's episode, we're going to talk about serverless, the cloud, AWS, and a whole lot more. My name is James Hewick, and I am a full-time technical content creator.
Hello, my name is Amy Dutton, and I'm the director of design at Zeal.
Hey everybody, Michael Liendo here, senior developer advocate over at AWS.
Love it. And today we are sponsored by or powered by the Learn, Build, Teach community. So this is one that I started a few years ago. Amy is an admin in there, and it's our community to help people learn, build, and teach and grow as developers. It's something I've been working on a lot recently, the Discord bot and the website, which has been a ton of fun with SvelteKit and Superbase and TypeScript. So anyway, if anybody is interested, check out Learn, Build, Teach at learnbuildteach.com. So Michael, we talked about this before we got started. We all got to hang out a little bit at Magnolia.js. Then we haven't really talked since then. And we've been looking for the time to get on and talk. So anyway, do you want to introduce yourself and tell people a little bit more about you?
Yeah, definitely. Magnolia.js, great conference, by the way. CFP is open for speakers coming up in October. It's Halloween themed, so check it out if you're at all interested in speaking or attending. But my name is Michael Liendo. I am previously on the Amplify team, which we can talk about a little bit in a second here. But I've been on AWS for about 2 years now, working a lot with the front-end community. My background is in front-end development. And now I work on the AppSync team over at AWS still, which is more or less the GraphQL side of things. There's a lot that it does out of the box for you, but more or less, it is still front-end development with a focus on GraphQL.
How long ago did you make that transition? Teams?
3 months ago, so pretty recent.
Okay. So is that right after Magnolia.js then, probably? Because Magnolia was in September?
Yeah, it was a week after.
Cool. Nice.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
which is crazy because the year before, Magnolia.js was virtual, and I gave a talk on Amplify, but at that time, it was like 12 hours later was when I got the job offer to speak at, or to
join Amplify.
or yeah, AWS.
Okay. Yeah.
How funny.
So I think I just need to keep speaking at Magnolia.js because
And you'll keep moving up the ladder in your career.
yeah.
Oh, that's funny. That was one of my favorite conferences this year.
Mm-hmm. I actually just recorded so much content this morning. I recorded a video on 10 conferences to look forward to for developers in 2023. I had Magnolia listed on there because I had a blast with that as well.
Yeah, I saw your tweet on it. Retweeted that.
Nice. Thank you. So there's lots of different ways to take like a cloud and serverless conversation. Maybe just like your background, like what was your interest in joining AWS, maybe as a company and maybe specifically the Amplify team at the time, a year and a half, maybe around 2 years ago, whenever that was?
Yeah, so I have my own company called Focus Otter Solutions, and it helps people in the community get sort of small businesses up to speed. Just a real quick and easy way to get sort of your mom and pop shop, get their website up, because a lot of times you see like, momandpoppizza.com, and like you go to their menu and it's the best because it's literally just an image. Like they just upload
Yes.
either a PDF or a picture. They look amazing, but they're not accessible, right? You can't zoom in without getting all the pixels involved. I was like, there has to be an easier way. So that's what I do in my local community. I get folks up to speed that way, but I wanted a way to quickly iterate on it while also keeping the cost low. So serverless technology seemed like a natural fit. You have a static website, and then you can have their custom domains, and you can set up sort of an API route that just hits up the database and pulls in, mom and pop menu.json. So in doing that, I had the benefit of looking at AWS, and at that point, I think a lot of us in the community we know Nader Dabit. He's been big on AWS. He's the one that got me into Amplify 3 years ago and introduced me to the DevRel side of things. And I've always sort of been akin to being on the forefront of the cloud and specifically how front-end developers can make that transition. So to me, all of that made sense. And what I ended up doing at the end of the day was writing blog posts, making YouTube videos, etc. And that essentially became my resume when it came time to join Amplify. So I went through the interview process, failed. Um, and then I was like, you know what? I'm going to be a solutions architect at AWS. So I applied there, failed, and then kept at it, very persistent. And then 3 months later, as we were just talking about, an open position came up on the Amplified team. I was sort of first of mind, really quick and straightforward interview process in that regard. And long story short, I've been on the team ever since, I guess, aside from recently when I left the team.
Awesome. I love that story of and it failed and then I
Yeah.
kept going. And I think, most people just see the end result that, oh, you're at Amazon.
Yep.
That's awesome that you get to do all this stuff. And they take for granted that there is some persistence involved there in order to make that happen.
Yeah, I don't come from a traditional background, unless like professional model is like traditional these days. I don't know. But
Professional model?
that's what I was doing before tech. I spent 6 years
Awesome.
modeling.
Pictures,
And,
or it didn't happen?
I've had too many job interviews where they did a
I
Google
was gonna
image
say
search.
you need to ask what kind of model first.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I've always had to put that disclaimer. It's like, if you want to look me up on Google Find, just don't do Google image search. Which so all of that stuff is there.
That's so awesome. Did you have a specialty?
Shirt off was kind
Okay.
of my specialty.
Yeah.
In the
I didn't know if it
industry,
was like hands, feet.
feet. I wish I'd be making money these days.
Oh, really?
No.
I feel like we should change the topic to what pictures make the most money these days.
I was a
left ear.
I was a catalog model. So I only did a little bit of runway, but the money in modeling is actually in catalog work.
Mhm.
So weddings, sort of the typical beach style, Calvin Klein type stuff. Runway is great because you get the fame and you get the notoriety, but you get paid in clothes a lot of the times.
Oh,
So
interesting.
I like to stick with catalog work
And money instead of clothes.
and money. Yeah, I heard that. That was always beneficial.
So what was your transition into tech then?
Yeah, my agent at the time, she was awesome, Marie P. Anderson. She's still in the industry. She says, what happens if something happens to the money maker?
Mhm.
And I was like, well, back then there was this brand new gadget. I don't know if you heard of it. It was called an iPhone, and it like just came out. Yeah, and there was a small little thing called an app store, which had a game called Angry Birds. And I was like, how hard could it be to do that? So I was like, I'm just gonna pick up a book and I'm just gonna start making these apps because apparently people are making like buttloads of money in this app store. So I did that, and then as you'll notice throughout the course of my stories, I failed, and then I was like, Objective C isn't for me. But how hard?
Not for a lot of people.
No. So like, how hard could Java be, right? Yeah, you saw how that went. And I was like, cool, but maybe I just got it confused because there's this thing called JavaScript and it looks a lot friendlier. And at that point, what I didn't realize is, and this is sort of a key point here, each time I failed, I thought I was going back to ground zero, but I'm really just on this ladder and I always
Scaling
clung
up.
to a rung.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Objective C, it ain't vibe with me, but through that I understood loops. And then, Java, I understood functions and variables and classes. And by the time I got to JavaScript, I was like, this is cool because I have this instant validation of what I can see on a web page combined with all this knowledge that I had from my previous failings. And I guess that was just the key point when it all started to make sense.
Super cool. I love that. I actually have a similar history of me joining Microsoft, of getting turned down twice, and then them saying, like, based on previous interviews, what do you think about this technical evangelist role? And that ended up being like the perfect thing for me at the time. Do you want to do like an overview of Amplify and just kind of talk about like what are the features, what are the use cases, and how that fits into like serverless in the cloud overall?
Yeah, absolutely. Is the audience familiar with DevRel, developer advocacy, and all that stuff in general? Should we prefix with that?
Yeah, I think it's worth it. We've talked a pretty good amount, just like in my previous roles, and then how content creation can have impact on your career, et cetera. But yeah, I would say go ahead and give a little bit of background for everybody on DevRel, developer relations, developer evangelism, developer
Yeah,
experience, all the different
all
potential titles they'll hear.
all the stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is a word that has a lot of different meanings just because of how new the role in the industry is, with respects to everything else like typical engineering. What I like to say is that developer advocacy, as opposed to maybe developer evangelism, is or product evangelism, is that it's bi-directional. So my role at AWS is that I put content out into the community. You all give me feedback, and then I use that feedback to bring the conversation internally so we can improve the product. So either you say this is great, so we keep doing that, or you say, hey, this feature, I tried it, it sucks. And I say, cool, like I love those conversations even more because now we get to bring those in and solve your problems. In a nutshell, that's pretty much what it is. I think a lot of you see the content that we put out in the different platforms where we like to hang out in. But at the end of the day, we have to do something with your feedback. And that's the part, especially when you talk about developer advocacy, that often gets missed is we have to drive the product forward by being that middle proxy between engineering and our users. Yeah, that's DevRel. In terms of Amplify, serverless, and all that fun stuff, Amplify is sort of this, I like to describe it as a five-headed dragon in a sense, where you can use it to kind of breathe fire on all your project requirements. So we have a UI library, which if you've used something like Chakra UI, it's essentially something very akin to Chakra UI or Theme UI for folks that have used those, where you have design tokens and all those primitive components, buttons, all that stuff with the predefined styles. We also have what's known as Amplify Studio, which is a nice GUI where you can sort of go in, and even without an AWS account, which is pretty cool, you can design your schema for your database. You can set up your API, and just by dragging and clicking things around, you can get pretty far. And when you're done, you can say, hey, cool, give me all of this so I can use it locally and maybe use it in a different project, or go ahead and deploy this to AWS, in which case it'll ask you to sign in. The other aspect is Amazon or Amplify hosting. And a lot of folks know that probably the most, which is where you can easily put your projects up in the cloud. I think the running joke for a long time was that it would take like 20 different services, and I'm not exaggerating too much, when you wanted to get Hello World, a static website that says Hello World running just on AWS services. And because of that, we have companies like Vercel and Netlify, and really good providers out there that make it easier. Well, Amplify Hosting does the same thing. It says, go ahead and give me, your React project, and I'll just deploy it for you, CI/CD, hooked up to GitHub, all that good stuff that modern developers know and love. And then we have Amplify CLI, which is probably the most powerful of the crew here, which is front-end developer focus. And you can say things like, hey, I want to add authentication to my application. So I'm going to run a command in the CLI, amplify add auth, and it'll set up Cognito, and which is kind of like Auth0, but for AWS. And if I want to add a database, amplify add storage is going to get me there. But storage could mean database or S3 bucket. So because I'm in a CLI, I get to decide what that means based off of my application requirements. But yeah, those are the main pieces of Amplify, and then each one can be broken down into different bits.
Since we mentioned Magnolia JS earlier, I'll go ahead and bring it up again. You gave a fantastic talk at that conference where it showcased a lot of those services and being able to set up authentication within the application within minutes, which was incredibly impressive.
Thanks. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's a good time, and it is really powerful. A lot of folks might be shy about AWS or maybe steered away from it because it does have probably too big what's
overall
the word
footprint.
Well, it has a bad rep when it comes to like two areas in particular. Like one is probably that it's not meant for front-end developers. Right? That could be in terms of like documentation, developer experience. And then the second one is that you can sort of shoot yourself in the foot and get this crazy high AWS bill. And this is a perfect segue into serverless because with serverless technology, you only pay for what you use. And the pricing model is often a lot more attractive than if you were to set up a server or something like that. So I would say if you have been steered away from AWS, like James was saying, a lot of folks use it, love it, but you should especially take advantage of it now, even if you're a front-end developer, especially if you're a front-end developer, because a lot of things have changed in recent years with our new focus on front-end developer experience.
Yeah. And there's a comment from Ryan Roga about how he's felt overwhelmed by AWS. And I think this is a pretty common theme. And this is because partially due to the fact that Amazon, AWS as an entire cloud platform has so many different things that you can do. Basically anything that you could potentially do in a cloud platform, you can do with AWS, which is a great thing. That's why things like storage and authentication and hosting, VMs, all those things are like in this same platform, which actually gives you benefits when you're looking to connect these services, because what better place to connect services than ones that already live in the same place together? So Ryan's kind of asking, is AWS doing anything to help with that onboarding? And I think that's exactly what you're saying with Amplify, is like they recognize the success of things like Netlify and Vercel and how they abstracted away AWS behind the scenes, just gave you the ability to connect to GitHub repo and have a project hosted. And that's the kind of stuff that now Amplify would take care of in a similar experience. But then I think also still has the ability, if you're more comfortable and comfortable going deeper into AWS, to tie in these additional services as well.
You got it. So when you use Amplify, like I guess to back up a little bit, you put it on a great point. And I even showed this in one of my slides at Magnolia JS, which is AWS has a whole bunch of services. And the crazy thing is that in my slide, I could only fit half of them on the slide. And I was like, sorry, like there's still 100 more, like there's over 200. And with that, we have, competing services and services that are very similar to each other, but nuanced. And it's like, how do you choose? Well, ideally, in most applications, or realistically, there are only going to be 5 to 8 that you would ever need, right? Files or asset storage, file storage, a database, authentication, and somewhere to host the thing. So when you start to say, I'm just going to solve this one problem, and you go from there and you say, I'm just going to solve this next problem, right? I need a way for my users to sign in. Well, I need a way to store the data when they start submitting the form. I need a way to send the email for this contact submission, right? You just take it one step at a time. And then, like you were alluding to, Amplify really does hold your hand as you take it piecemeal. And then at the end of the day, you can run a command, amplify delete, and that'll be like, okay, cool. I am going to take my entire project and just sort of wipe it because I don't want to deal with charges or any incurrent billing in that regard. I'm just going to like, cool, that's, POC is a toy app. I'm going to throw it away now.
Also, did you hear my Amazon delivery notification?
I'm that good. I just timed it. So I was like, yeah. But yeah, that's Amplify. Serverless is its like own little paragraph within that. Amplify only uses serverless services out of the box. You can of course configure other things, but serverless is great just for and that's kind of where everything seems to be heading, having things event driven, asynchronous, and then based off of a managed service. And that's the big word within Amazon, is having a managed service. So you only pay for what you get. When you're not using it, you're not getting billed. And then when you get a whole bunch of traffic, it will automatically scale for you. Those are sort of the 3 tenets of something being serverless. And all the services that Amplify uses out of the box adhere to that.
Thought it was really interesting when you kind of mentioned the use case for Amplify being replacing this previous workflow of maybe having to create and initialize 20 different services potentially to manually to build and deploy your application. And I think that's really interesting for people to think about when you use either AWS Amplify or other platforms that give you kind of that higher level abstracted interactions. It's kind of interesting to think about all the things that go on behind the scenes. And you mentioned S3. So S3 and Amazon is like just blob storage, file storage. So those would be used for like your actual files for quote unquote your static site. And static site could be debated how you call that, but the output of a React application, basically, when you run a build, is a set of static files. So those things get hosted somewhere. Then you need DNS, then you need a domain. If you need a database, you need a database. If you need authentication, you need authentication. If you have serverless functions, you'd have to go and set up AWS Lambda behind the scenes all by yourself and connect all the things. And I think that is where people that don't spend a ton of time in AWS specifically do get overwhelmed. And I think that's understandable. With this, it obviously gets a lot nicer, but it's just really interesting to kind of mentally go beyond the curtain and think about all the things that have to happen for any application to exist, and to exist in a way that's going to not only work like for regular amounts of people, but also scale with increased usage.
Yeah, the cool thing is that a lot of applications have phenomenal DX, but I always wonder, like, how does that work when you have 10 users versus when you have 10,000 users? And what happens when they don't come in a steady stream, like it just gradually increases, but something happened, your blog post took off, or your product got featured #1 post on Reddit, and now everybody's being flooded to your service now. And we're kind of seeing that now, to like, as folks shuffle from Twitter to Mastodon, right? Mastodon's run on servers, and it's not serverless, so it's not going to scale automatically, or Chat GPT, when there's servers in place there. So when you go there and everybody's going there at once because they just got off work and they want to check things out, then you get things like, hey, sorry, our service is down because we have to provision more resources. Yeah.
And that difference is like provisioning resources means the stereotypical way before, like serverless and like the cloud fundamentals of scaling, was you would pick like, I need a server with this much RAM and hard drive and CPU. And after you make that decision, that's what you got. So if you end up needing more, you're in this situation where you need to figure out like, do I get a bigger machine? Do I move everything to that machine? Do I have multiple machines? Do I load balance between the multiple machines? So that idea of scaling like on your own without a platform to help do that can be really overwhelming. And that's why you see like, is anybody building anything not intended to be in the cloud at this point? Like all I hear about is companies just moving away from their own data centers and their on-prem deployments to taking advantage of the quote unquote cloud as a whole.
I was going to say Basecamp is the answer to your question.
James Cameron, I think Avatar 2 just came out last week, which I still need to go check out. But during the middle of their development process, or their directing, they realized that the production cost was so high because they were rendering everything locally that they had to move to AWS, and they had to have have it scaled automatically. And I guess there's 2 ways to think about scaling. There's scaling up, and then there's scaling horizontally. So we can either add more of these instances, or we could increase the power on the ones that we do have. And they had to do both just because of how awesome the graphics are. But yeah, it's a cool story that just came out the other day, but I thought it was really interesting.
Well, I mean, even to go back to the Basecamp example, it was really interesting when they announced that they were going to take everything off the cloud and have their own servers. There were people that were commenting and saying, okay, so you're complaining about, say, like a 500K AWS bill. I don't know what it was, but they were saying, so you're going to have to hire more than 2 or 3 devs to manage all those services, not even taking into account the server side of it. Like that's more than your 500K right there.
Exactly. Yeah. The fact that you don't have to, people, when they talk about pricing, they often talk about just the services. But as you just pointed out, Amy, that's not the most expensive part. It's like we know how much developers make. So that's the most expensive part. So if it can have a managed service that will scale for me, that's one less dev person that has to oversee that.
There was a question I wanted to pull up from James Foreman on YouTube asking, how well does Amplify work with SvelteKit? I always hear about React and Vue when it comes to Amplify. I'll give like my guess of an answer, and I'd love for you to like clear that up. I think Amplify as a whole is going to work with like regardless what framework you're using, because it's more on like it's not really super specific to the framework itself in terms of hosting. I think with SvelteKit, like SvelteKit has adapters to be deployed to any different hosting provider, so I think that would factor in. And then I think probably people just hear about React and Vue with Amplify, probably just because those frameworks are still more popular, just kind of the dominating names in the landscape. But are there any specifics that like are tied to a framework or that work better with React and Vue versus something newer like SvelteKit?
I would say you hit the nail on the head. Is we work very well with pretty much any JavaScript framework. But as you get into sort of the details of it, you're going to have a much nicer experience with Angular, Vue, and React, just because those seem to be the core. I guess, what are we calling these days? Meta frameworks? They're not meta frameworks. They're sort of like the core of the ecosystem. So Next.js is a big one just because of the SSR support there. But yeah, SvelteKit is supported from a hosting standpoint, but as you get into things like our UI components, those are specifically built out in React. Or if you were to go into Amplify Studio, design your application, and say, cool, like give me all of the code from my Figma template, turn it into a component, which we do support. It's going to do so and generate React components for you, just because that seems to be based off of what we're hearing from the community, the first class citizen there. So I think that's another point in itself, is we are driven by the community. So if all of a sudden one day everybody is developing Svelte, then
that's what you'll do.
Yeah, we pivot, we follow our customers. It's sort of a AWS thing, and we'll support Svelte as a first class citizen that way.
Cool. One other question I wanted to bring up, and this is a fun topic with serverless. So Subham is asking about cold starts with Lambda function. So Lambda is specifically the name in AWS for serverless functions. The name Lambda actually gets used, I think, interchangeably with serverless function, but it's specifically the AWS name for serverless. And so they're asking about the idea of cold start, and then how do you prevent it? So what is cold start when it comes to serverless functions?
Yeah, at this year's reInvent, we got a peek into cold starts of like what it actually is, what's happening behind the scenes. Really, at the end of the day, it's a cache. So as you go to a website, and I think you can, if any of us have experience with like Heroku, it's a perfect example because their Dino thing always frustrated me.
Pauses.
But yeah, from this perspective, let's say you go to a website, and before you get to like see the contents of the web page, it's sort of loading. You got this blank screen. You can imagine that being a cold start where it hasn't gotten to your code yet. It's still like warming up. It's still like, oh man, let me go ahead and like get you my code. So when you have that in place, obviously like latency is a big factor. I mean, 2 seconds of latency on Amazon costs us like almost $1 million, just because like that's how impatient customers can be when they're shopping. Unless you're Amy, you just get your packages.
That's right.
Amy's like, I'm buying regardless.
I know. So a cold start is essentially what happens when your application consistently gets cached. If I go to mywebsite.com, I've now alerted that function that you have to be ready. So now when James goes to it, that function is already warm. And so that information gets sent instantly. That it keeps a cache in place. So how do we get to cold starts? Well, when enough time passes by, there's a cache hit, and now we have to retrieve and wake up that function all over again. So there's the context. How do we fix it? AWS, and a core reason why it's great to sort of use the platform that it was built on, is nice in the sense that you can have what's called provision concurrency. This is a nice way of saying I can set the amount of timeout to keep my Lambda function warm. Now, this comes at the cost, right? If I'm going to maintain a cache, then that cost is going to like be applied to me. I'm now responsible for that. Now, I do always want to point out, whenever I talk about AWS and cost, I'm always talking in the sense, unless stated otherwise, fractions of a penny or pennies. That's the scale that we're working with here. So, I mean, you get 1 million invocations on Lambda for 1 cent. So that's the scale that we're at. So that's one way. Folks do kind of weird things in the community. They'll just create a Lambda function that will always ping another Lambda function. Don't do that. I mean, at the end of the day, what we're talking about is like one user needs to be able to hit your application within a certain amount of time so that the rest of the users don't have to get that. If that function isn't being hit all that often, then what kind of application are we working with really? Like my to-do application doesn't need to be always warm. And then the other way is to have your function be run at the edge. So if it's run at the edge, it's closer to your users, which means only those specific users will have essentially access to it. And I guess when everything's consolidated locally, then you have more users pinging it throughout the day anyways. But yeah, we have tools in place for that. I would say cold start is it's like, because it's there, folks have to kind of poke at it. But in the grand scheme of things, it's not that big of a deal. It used to be in Java. It used to be like, it would take 10 seconds to wake the function up, as opposed to like a Node.js function, which takes, I don't know, 1.5 to 2. But now we've actually fixed that at this year's reInvent.
Super cool. That, like, the idea of pinging your server every 30 minutes or something to keep it alive is like the stereotypical Heroku thing, where you get a free tier on Heroku, which doesn't exist anymore. Yeah. But you started with a free tier on Heroku, and after 30 minutes of not being used, the server would fall asleep. And then the next time you come in, I have to wake it back up, etc. And people would just ping it every 29 minutes to make sure that it stayed alive. And the flip side of this, by the way, is like, before getting into serverless and Dockerized containers and things that fall asleep for your applications, was you had a dedicated server and it just stayed awake the entire time. Like the server was just constantly running. So this is where the optimizations from a cloud platform come in, is the ability to put stuff to sleep and reallocate resources and then wake it back up when necessary. And that's why you get the cold start, because you're not going to have it running constantly unless it's actually being hit constantly. But that's just some of the trade-offs. But the more I hear about cold starts overall, it's like every day they're like, cold start just got smaller and smaller and smaller, and maybe eventually I don't know if it'll go away completely, but it'll be so it'll be so negligible that it won't really have a noticeable impact.
Yeah, that's a cool thing about AWS is and I say things that are actually cool. I'm not one of those people like shell out like, this is great. I would say I actually kind of stay away from the marketing side of things. But something that is generally cool is, over time, you just kind of pay less and you get more features without having to like opt in or even do anything. AWS is like, yeah, we give you like this many more invocations and we cut the price by 30%. And you're like, that's great. Like, I didn't do anything.
Yeah, this is my first sound effect of the day.
That was great.
There's a question from Scion, which we've had lots of conversations behind the scenes on Discord about terms and definitions and stuff, but asking for the difference between serverless, edge, BaaS. I actually don't know what BaaS stands for. Like, usually there's IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. So infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. I don't know what BaaS is personally.
Backend.
Oh, just backend. Oh, yeah. Easy. I figured it was something that would be relatively obvious. And then cloud functions and ed functions. There's a lot there. Do you want to try to tackle like loose definitions for those different ones?
Yeah, for sure. We kind of alluded to a couple so far, but just kind of give it a whirlwind tour. Serverless is the idea of paying for what you use. That's a core tenet of it. And then having it scale based off of your needs. So it will automatically allocate more resources if you have high usage, and then it will automatically scale down based off of your usage. It's sort of elastic is another way of saying it. Edge, I'm going to punt on that one because it corresponds with edge functions, and I think tying those two together will make more sense. Backend of it as a service, you can sort of think of Amplify in this regard when I talk about our CLI and Amplify Studio. So having your backend as a service means it is itself managed, similar to how a platform as a service would itself be managed. except in this case, it's going to be sort of sliced to only contain things that pertain to your backend. So having a sort of platform that will automatically set up your database and your API and develop a schema and things like that for it. I'm looking at you, sort of Hasura. Things of that nature is what I would consider backend as a service. Cloud, that is a provider.
Someone else's machine.
Someone else. Thank you. I was like, oh man, it's like so nuanced. Yeah. Someone else's machine to provision resources for you. And then we get into cloud functions. That is going to go along with cloud. And I would say the way to liken that is a Lambda function is a type of cloud function that is meant to run on AWS. Azure has Azure functions that are meant to run on Azure. Same thing with Google, GCP, Google Cloud Platform. Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
So then going back to Edge, when you set up a Lambda function, that will only get deployed in one region. Now, to specify a region, it's like geographic points throughout the world. Not a big deal. But sometimes, like, if my audience is in, I don't know, Melbourne, Australia, and I just set up this Lambda function in San Francisco because that's where I live personally, that's not going to be great in terms of latency when folks in Australia start pinging my function. So I can specify that that function is an edge function. And the edge means go ahead and deploy it to multiple regions that I can specify. So that way it's close to various other people. And in this case, I would probably put one in Melbourne.
Yep. And that's Edge. So I'm actually going to record a video on JavaScript trends of 2023 to keep an eye out on. And Edge is going to be one of those big ones for me. And I think Cloudflare was really the first one of the abstracted hosting platforms to do Edge, which is probably built on top of AWS. So this was my first introduction of them having their own they brag about having their own data centers, I think, too. So I don't know if they're their own data centers or if they're on top of AWS. I'm not actually sure about that. But data centers all over the world, and you can replicate code all over the world and be faster, closer to the actual users. But that also takes a different runtime. And that so instead of running in a Node.js runtime, I think Cloudflare Workers is its own runtime, and then we've got Dino and Bun that are also alternative JavaScript runtimes that I think can both run at the edge as well. So it's kind of I guess it's always a wild time in JavaScript and web development because there's always so many things coming up. But I feel like next year we'll see more and more of that sort of stuff that we heard about this year, like really catch on and come into play for people.
Yeah, it's tricky for sure. Because I guess then like a question that would automatically come up is like, why don't we just make everything run on the edge? Like, well, certain things like if you have one function that is actually just being redeployed across different regions, when something goes wrong, it's like being on VPN but not knowing which location you kind of hopped into. It's like, where did that happen? So you're tracking that down. Things like monitoring and observability play a strong foothold in that.
There was a question. This one. What's the difference between edge functions and cloud functions? And if there's a difference, what's the best approach to learning and using them appropriately?
Yeah,
I believe edge is more about location, right? Because you're trying to get it as close to the end user as possible.
You got it. Yeah, I think we touched on that one. And then the second part to that, is there a difference or what's the best approach? Always go with your sort of regular vanilla cloud function, especially in the beginning, because one, you can use a cloud provider like AWS or whoever. But then two, as you adopt some of these frameworks that we've been talking about, Netlify functions and Vercel API routes or Next.js API routes, that concept itself becomes a little bit more solidified because you're only dealing with the function. And I have a give and take with how they do that stuff, but I think it just makes it easier learning overall.
There's a fun comment from, sorry, we double dipped. Fun comment from David Kennedy on saying that he built an ETL process, which is extract, transform, load, basically like migrating data from one source to another semi-real time using Lambdas and S3 and cut costs by $1,500 a month.
Nice.
By basically migrating and adopting serverless. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. A lot of stories like that.
This is a good question. So this is from Ryan. What do these endpoints look like? And is there any type of guarding that takes place? How do you keep your serverless functions protected against other people using your functions?
Yeah, good question. And that's a perfect way for me to step on my soapbox about what I don't like about some of the frameworks that give you things like functions out of the box as part of the framework. So the reasoning is because when you have a function and you say like, this is going to allow me to hit up an endpoint, there's actually two parts to that. And I'll like put a little asterisk there for now. The first part is, of course, the function itself. It's where your JavaScript code is going to live. The other part, though, is that there has to be an API that routes traffic to that specific function. So if I have a notes application, right, it'd be and I want to get a specific note, /notes/note ID. I need to have an API, which is its own service. And then that would route to a function, which is its own service itself. So there's two pieces there. So in terms of guardrails, I can choose to say, I'm either going to guard it, my code that is, at the API level by having proxies or firewalls in place, or I can guard it at the function level, which is where CORS comes into play. It says, hey, based off of these headers, thou shalt not pass. But yeah, and then I guess that the asterisk there is that recently AWS announced that you can give a URL to your function itself. Great. It takes away the first service and makes things a little bit streamlined. But now you have to have that responsibility managed yourself, which is adding in those security headers based off of cookies or other headers and things like that. CORS.
And really the authentication piece doesn't change that much in terms of like, I think this is often a forgotten aspect in either building a full Node.js backend or building serverless functions, API endpoints with whatever your framework of choice is that you usually create those endpoints so that your front end can call and consume data from those endpoints to display notes in the application. But what you have to consider is like if you don't have any security around the endpoint, just because your application can call it also means that anybody else can call this until you take into account like where the request is coming from, like domain wise, et cetera. But those things can be spoofed, including like the core stuff is specifically in the browser. So people could go into Postman or something and just send a request directly to it. And that's where authentication comes in. And this thing gets like more and more complicated because you probably want like only authenticated users to be able to do stuff. And then how do you communicate that a user is authenticated? And then how do you confirm that? And a very popular technique now is JSON Web Tokens, so JWTs. You can include information about the user. You can parse and validate the JWTs and then make decisions to prevent the users from accessing that endpoint based on that data. But that's also the same authentication conversation that you would have, or very similar, that you would have with like a regular traditional server as well. So a lot of those best practices that were already there are still in place, even if it's in a serverless world.
Yeah, one thing to add to that is a lot of times, and it makes sense when we talk about serverless functions and cloud functions in general, we talk about them from the aspect of an API route. But I guess what makes them great is that they don't have to be. It can be as Amy was talking about, when you push a button and lights would change, or when a user signs up. Like it really is just like a function that responds to an event, and that event can, of course, be an API route being hit, but it could also be like literally anything that has access to make that network request.
Because I often don't distinguish between those things because I use these abstracted things that create API endpoints and not necessarily associating the fact that there are two different things behind the scenes. There's the actual function for the logic, and then there's the routing to that function that has to take place.
Yeah.
And James, I believe we talked a little bit about all of this with the secret environmental variables episode, which is now our most popular episode. Looking at the analytics the other day. So I'll include a link in the chat for that.
Yeah, we went down basically the rabbit hole of like the progression of building an application and realizing you need more and more things in place to protect your application from the outside. That was a fun episode. So if you want more on security and secrets and that sort of stuff, go and check that one out.
Oh, nice. That's not the one with Snick. That was a different one?
Different one.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, that was
just the two of us.
Yeah.
Nice.
me and James. And the joke, which I think I started, but I never finished throughout the episode. So I don't know if you guys have played Jackbox, but there's a character on there that when you pick him, he always goes, secrets.
Oh yeah.
In the background. So I told James at the beginning of the episode, I'm just going to say secrets the entire episode.
We
I
should have
don't
had a
think I did.
competition to
That's
like
awesome.
count how many times you said it and
Uh-huh.
post on it on
Yeah.
Twitter or something. Funny. There was another question from Scion and SvelteKit or Next and SvelteKit. So how do frameworks like Next and SvelteKit create APIs in the front end? So a little clarification. So the API routes, the API endpoints are not on the front end. They are on the back end. And SvelteKit has adapters. Next.js, depending on where you host it, has an adapter, or if it's for sale, I think it just works naturally, which is expected. But those adapters are basically what takes the code that's in the framework and then translates that to the code that the hosting provider, in this case AWS, would need to translate that to actual Lambda functions and routes and like whatever else needs to go on behind the scenes. So it's really the adapters that go into making or transforming that code into a way that the actual hosting platform can understand and host it accordingly.
Yep. And Ryan also made a good point about SvelteKit. So you can create a plus page.server.js or TS if you're using TypeScript. And that defines everything that happens on the server side before it sends it over to the front end.
Shameless plug. I have a video coming out on SvelteKit, folder-based routing and loaders tomorrow using Storyblock, which for the demo, which has been a ton of fun. Storyblock has this live or visual editor where you can connect your application to it. So you can actually not only like edit your data inside of Storyblock, but also see what it looks like on the website. I think it just does an iframe of your website and pulls it in, but it's super, super cool. Works really, really nice. I'm excited about that.
Very cool.
I hear little feet approaching.
You'll get the.
Is that our cue to wrap up?
Oh, that was the dog.
Just a dog. Just a dog. We're good.
I was gonna say, just stay quiet and nobody will know. Do you have any like recommendations, I guess, for how people may get started with AWS, maybe specifically with Amplify? Like, are there any good places to start there?
I was gonna say Michael has some great content.
Thank you. I was like, like and subscribe.
Hit that smash button.
Right.
In order, I'll say that the Amplify docs are a really good starting point. Once you get past that, my job on the Amplify team was specifically Amplify in production. So I went deep on not just getting started content, but then also what does it look like in the real world? You know, past the hello world and the do app. What does it look like when we start piecing things together with Stripe, etc. And for that kind of stuff, you can definitely check me out as Focus Starter on YouTube or over at Hashnode, where I have my blog there. So Focus Starter on Hashnode.
Be posting a link to that now. And do you want to take a few minutes to talk about the newest team that you're on?
Yeah. So I talked a lot about Amplify and how that's geared towards front-end developers, but there's also back-end developers are still there. So on the app sync team, we do that middle ground. We're that API layer. So we are specifically working in GraphQL as opposed to REST. So if you use something like API Gateway, we are not that. We're a managed service, so we're still serverless. And then you essentially define a schema. And through the use of that schema, you can, if you use something like Apollo or Prisma before, you attach your resolvers and all of those things. The cool thing is that if you're using Amplify in conjunction with AppSync, which is perfectly possible, we generate all of those resolvers for you. So really, you just define your schema, and then like the database gets created for you, the resolvers to your database gets created for you. And then if you wanted to sort of break out of that model and do things custom, you can write JavaScript functions, just like if they were a Lambda function, but now they're sort of in the context of belonging to AppSync, which is really cool because now you have a way to connect to your data sources through what would be presumed as a Lambda function, but it's not. We're just making that binding for you, and you don't have to pay for a Lambda function or any of that stuff. Really, we're just sort of letting you write your code in JavaScript and connect to your data sources, which could be a multitude of things.
Was GraphQL something you were specifically interested in before coming to that team?
Yeah, it's I wanted to break out of the REST model. GraphQL was sort of always on the forefront. It spiked, had a hype, and then like most things, there's a lot of hype around it, and then it's like, okay, cool, but like let's talk about it really. And now that it's there in this spot where it's not going to overtake the world, but it does have practical use cases, let's talk about them, then that's like my happy place. We have a lot of customers that work with queries, mutations, but then also out of the box, we give you subscriptions. So now you have real-time WebSocket supports in play. All that stuff gets hidden behind the scenes. We just give you like the API to interact with it. And that's my happy place. I'm not that super deep cloud person. I'm really just like, what are the tools in place so that people can use them and make our lives easier? That's me.
I love it. I'm definitely in the same boat. Like anything, unless there's something I specifically feel like I need to learn or want to learn,
Yeah.
I'm just like, give it to me and let me build stuff. That's fine.
Builder mentality. Yeah, honestly.
Pause.
Oh, I'm just scrolling through the comments here.
All good.
Yeah. There's been some good interaction from the audience today.
Yeah. The just general conversations about cloud and serverless and acronyms and terminology and stuff, I feel like is always a pretty relatable topic for people. Cool. Do we want to move into the last section of the podcast, which is our picks and plugs section?
Oh,
Amy,
I'm
shake
ready.
your head. Oh, you're
I'm
ready?
I'm
Okay.
so ready.
Oh, okay.
I am not, so I will volunteer to let Amy go first.
Yeah. So I had a great one planned for Friday and I forgot what it was. And I remembered.
Now
what
you
it
remember
is.
it? Nice.
Yes. So my pick for the week is I'm going to pick a Plex server. Do you guys use
heard
it?
of that.
Have one? Yeah.
Like
It's
a
like
media server at
free
home.
videos.
My own personal Netflix.
Yes.
So I'm old enough that I have old DVDs. I have a NAS drive, and I know I have ripped all of my personal DVDs that I have bought and paid for personal use, put them on my NAS drive, and can watch them through a Plex server. So Plex is a piece of software that runs like on your TV, like an app, and they provide the metadata to be able to get that Netflix style or Prime Video style viewing experience where you can see all of the actors and actresses and the trailers and all that metadata. So it's been a fantastic experience because, first world problems, it's too hard to go over to the DVD player and swap it out. So nice having that available as an app on the TV. So definitely highly recommend Plex, their whole system, especially if you have a NAS drive. And then for my plug, I'm going to plug, it is December 20th. It is not too late to participate in Advent. So James and I created Advent of CSS and Advent of JavaScript last year, and we've repackaged those challenges for this year. So even though it is the 20th of December, it is not too late because those challenges are evergreen and they'll still be available even after the 24th. So if you're looking to level up with CSS or JavaScript, be sure to check that out at Advent of CSS or adventofjavascript.com.
Michael, are you ready or do you want me to go?
Yeah, I'm good.
for it.
So for my pick, do they have to be technical? I don't have a
No,
no.
not at all. Yeah,
Okay,
anything
cool.
that's fun.
So I've been diving deep in this book. So I've read 32 books this year.
Nice.
But it's only because I've been addicted to this one series called He Who Fights with Monsters. So it's a lit RPG. I don't know what that means, but I know like the RPG part. Like I was like, lit, it's lit. So essentially it's, character, he wakes up, open field, he's like, what the heck is going on? He's essentially in a video game sort of thing, like as he thinks. And you follow him throughout his journey. He's getting stronger, leveling up, getting new powers, and it's a fantastic story. I listened to it on Audible. I just kind of close my eyes, hop into this world, and then I'm there, and we're fighting bad guys all over the place. It's amazing. There are 9 books in that series, so I've just been devouring them. So there's my pick.
That's awesome.
In what was the other one? Plug.
Mm-hmm.
For the plug, I'm gonna plug my YouTube channel. I declared on Twitter that because of gestures around, I'm going to be spending less time on Twitter, but I'm going to be putting more of a focus not on Mastodon or any of the other providers. I'm actually going to be focusing on my YouTube channel. I just got to a point where I'm monetized now. I just got approved. So yeah, I'm looking forward to getting better. I take a lot of inspiration from what YouTube have done, and if folks want to drop by, let me know what kind of content you want to see and rate my setup and all that stuff. Let me know, because I really want to get better at this.
You have a troll in the chat that wants a modeling video.
I have a commercial on YouTube, a couple actually, but anyways, it was neither here nor there.
Excuse me while I go search for this.
It was Panchero's Mexican grill. I don't know.
Oh yes.
So
I haven't seen it, but I can't wait to look.
I did one for them, and then I did one for Motorola. There was this like cool gadget. But yeah, the Pancheros one, I took a bite of a burrito. If you see it, it's not even a cooked burrito. It was filled with lettuce. It was good.
That's amazing. This is so good. All right, I am going to pick an app called PixArt. So it's on Apple. I don't know. I assume it's probably on Android as well. But I was kind of looking for if there was an app that when I take these pictures of myself for YouTube videos that could remove the background and then add the outline, like colored outline to me. Yes. So I like stand out on my thumbnails. And I'd been using Canva for this. Canva's like $14-15 a month, and it worked pretty good, but it was also like annoyingly buggy at times. When I would go to export, it would just warp the entire picture. So anyway, I was kind of just trying out different ones, and I tried out PixArt, and it had the ability to do exactly what I want. So it can remove the background. It can then add the outline effect to myself. And you also have like standard, I guess not so standard, like really good options for coloring the image itself. And so like you could choose different effects and colors and that sort of stuff, tons of different settings, and then just download it and upload it to Figma for a thumbnail. So that's been working really well. So I just paid, I think it was like $59 for a year subscription. And I just canceled my Canva subscription, which was $14-15 a month. So I'll save money in a couple of months because that's all I use Canva for. So anyway, actually had experiments with that and then officially used it for a thumbnail for a video that's going live tomorrow, which leads me to my plug, which is a specific video that I mentioned earlier that is will be live tomorrow as of recording this. So by the time the podcast comes out, it'll be live. But it is about SvelteKit 1.0 folder routing and loaders using a hands-on demo with Storyblock. So in there, we kind of break down how the folder-based structure works and then how loaders work and pull in data from Storyblock and render that to the screen, etc. So I had a lot of fun working on that. Storyblock was super cool. Love talking about the SvelteKit new syntax and stuff because people are still kind of learning what it is and how it works and getting used to it. So anyway, that video will be live tomorrow. If you listen to this on the podcast, it should be live, so you can go ahead and check it out directly.
Nice.
Any last parting words of wisdom or anything you want to share with our audience?
Don't be afraid to hop into AWS if you're a front-end developer. Now is an amazing time. But then also definitely check out Learn, Build, Teach. I've been a casual scroller in that community, and I have to get more involved because it's amazing. But yeah, that's all I got.
Cool.
Oh, he stole your line, James.
Did he say that's all we got?
Yeah.
Or did he say that's all I got? We should have just ended it there.
Yeah, done.
But just out of ego. And that's all we got. Santi just commented should do a video on auth and SvelteKit. They just announced, I missed this originally, but they just announced a SvelteKit auth library, similar, I assume, to Next Auth, and I'm super excited to try that out. So that will definitely be a video that I'll do in the future. Another option that I have really loved is working with Supabase. So like that would consider backend as a service, I think, going back to that definition. They give you so much, and the SDK is really good. And then I imagine you could layer in AWS Incognito auth in there as well. So lots of good options. Cool. Let me check. Actually, I'm not going to worry about rating. I'm just going to call it. I need to go run Christmas errands.
Oh boy.
Because
Nice.
Jess ran some earlier and she was like, when you get done, you're going to do this, this, and this. And I was like, okay. Because she was off yesterday and today. And for the next week and a half, which is good. But thanks everyone for hanging out and asking questions.
Thank
Chat
you.
was really great
Yeah.
today. Thank you all for participating and being a part of it. Really appreciate it. We'll see you later.